So I asked you when you first competed against Leah or Will Thomas, was there a voice in you that said, I shouldn't compete and I should try to get my fellow females to stop competing? What is your take on that?
I talked to my teammates. We took it amongst ourselves to kind of really whisper, right? We whispered. We were walking on eggshells talking about this, and we all felt the same way. It was kind of just this battle of, do we want to kind of throw away everything we had worked our entire lives for? You know, this was my last meet ever in my 18 years of my career. I was capping it off, and so it was a really hard thought process to kind of go through, especially given the fact that at least I feel like it happened pretty quickly. I didn't know of many other stories at the time. And now looking back, I of course believe everything happened for a reason. And I think the way that Thomas and I tied and all of the different factors were pretty crucial to the story. But now, as I continue to see more girls be exploited in locker rooms and lose out on opportunities and injured in their sports, it's going to take a boycott. And I know it's easier said than done, but it would just take one time to send the message that we have had enough. But instead, what we're seeing women stand on the podium and smile and applaud at their own demolition, their own destruction. And we're expecting someone else to jump in and save us, but we're not even willing to save ourselves. Um, and again, it took me some self-realization to get to that point, and so that's why I say I know it's easier said than done. But that's truly what needs to happen to make effective and immediate change.
Yeah, I said that at the time. There is really nothing else would work like not having the women compete. That ends the sport. And have this fraud, and Leah Thomas is a fraud, have them swim alone. It would end it. It would, as you say, overnight. So I'm curious, do you go, are you even allowed to go to colleges and make this appeal to women in women's sports?
Yeah, I certainly have, and I certainly continue to. It's a big piece, I think, in the fight moving forward, especially coming from a college campus, seeing how the freedom of speech is entirely under threat. A big part of what I do now is going back on college campuses, sharing the story, and hoping to motivate and inspire other young people in my generation, to take a stand against this, really not even against anything, to take a stand for the truth and take a stand for women and for fairness. This argument, it really isn't anti anything. It's pro fairness, and again, it's pro reality, it's pro sanity, it's pro common sense, it's pro good faith. We live in a godless society now, and that's rampant on college campuses. Again, I know because I just came from one. I see how essentially conservatives were deemed as criminals, which is a pretty chilling thought.
Yeah, believe me, I'm well aware of it. I get it every day. So you are now. What happens when you're invited to a campus? Is there massive protest? What happens? Give me an example.
It's probably exactly how you would picture. Of course, there are people there in support. Of course, there are, but the protesters are present. They are loud. They're obnoxious. They are obscene. They are violent. They're vengeful. They're hateful. Yet they do it in the name of love and inclusion and tolerance and acceptance and welcoming and all of those different things. But again, I've never seen that from these protesters. They're not willing to have open dialogue. They're not willing to come with an open mind. They come with a closed mind, and I'm naive to think that I have the opportunity to change their minds. Majority of the time, these protesters are unwilling to listen, unwilling to ask questions. It's more so just name calling. Last week, I was at West Virginia University, where it's the same story. Of course, last year I went to San Francisco State University, where I was met with ambush. I mean, I was assaulted. I was held for ransom for over 4 hours around 4 hours, where these protesters locked me and the police officers into a room and demanded that if we wanted to make it out and see our families safely again, we had to pay them money. I missed my flight home. The police officers did nothing because they told me they were scared to be seen as anything other than an ally to this community. I mean, it was very clearly the prisoners were running the asylum.
Why didn't I know about that story?
It got national attention. And to walk you through it a little more, of course, I was there on San Francisco State University's campus to share my experience, growing up an athlete, what it takes, the silencing, the locker room, the unfair competition, all of the different pieces of it. After the event had concluded, the protesters rushed into the room, to which I was told by the officers that the doors would be locked. Actually, I was supposed to meet the officers an hour and a half before the event. The officers never showed up to our meeting. But the protesters, they rushed into the room, they turned off the lights, and they rushed me at the front of the room, and I was punched, I was hit, I was assaulted. That's when an officer kind of whisked me away we couldn't make it out of the building because there were so many protesters, hundreds of them. That's when they pushed me into another classroom along that same hallway, where that was my prison for 4 hours. Again, these protesters were yelling the most awful things you could imagine. All the while, the police did nothing. The university, the next day, they sent an email out to their student body. And in this email, sent out by Vice President of Student Affairs, Dr. Jamila Moore, she said, "I'm so proud of our brave students. I applaud them for handling Riley Gaines, someone so personally abhorrent as Riley Gaines, in the manner that they did. We know how deeply traumatic someone who spreads so much violence like herself can be on campus. And so here are some resources, just know we see you, we hear you, we love you." They applauded the students for kidnapping me, for punching me.